Today we're diving into one of those incredible stories that feels almost too poetic to be true. The life of Junius George Groves, a man born into slavery who became one of the wealthiest black landowners in early 20th century America and was famously known as the Potato King of the world. That title might sound whimsical, but make no mistake, his story is about grit, brilliance, and a vision that transcended the limits of his time. Picture this. It's 1859 in Kentucky. The country's on the edge of the Civil War. And somewhere in a slave cabin near Greene County, a boy named Junius George Groves is born. A child of bondage, born into a system that didn't recognize his humanity. But even as a young boy, Groves had a spark, a work ethic and intelligence that refused to stay buried. When freedom came after the Civil War, the world didn't magically become fair. Far from it. Freedom, for many, meant starting over from nothing, with no land, no capital, and a society that still saw them as less than. Yet Groves refused to be defined by that. In 1879, he joined what was called the Exoduster movement, one of the first great migrations of African Americans westward. Thousands of formerly enslaved people left the South, seeking new lives in Kansas, a state that symbolized opportunity and abolitionist courage. Junius Groves and his wife, Matilda, were among them. They settled near Nicodemus, Kansas, one of the few all-black frontier towns founded by freedmen. At first, they had almost nothing, just hard work, faith, and land that didn't always want to cooperate. Imagine trying to farm on the Great Plains in the 1880s. No irrigation, harsh weather, and tough soil. But Groves had something special, a mind for systems. He studied how crops behaved, soil composition, spacing, watering cycles. He learned by observation and experimentation. Where others saw exhaustion, he saw opportunity. His crop of choice? Potatoes. Now that might sound simple, but at the time, potatoes were a high-demand crop that fed rail workers, soldiers, and booming urban centers. And Groves didn't just grow potatoes, he mastered them. Within a decade, he was producing yields that stunned agricultural experts. Newspapers began calling him the Potato King of the world, because by the early 1900s, he was reportedly growing more bushels per acre than anyone else on Earth. Let's pause on that for a second. A man born enslaved, denied education, denied rights, denied property, becomes the global benchmark for agricultural efficiency. That's not just a success story, that's a revolution. But Groves wasn't content just to farm. He started buying land, and he didn't stop. By the early 1900s, he owned over 500 acres near Edwardsville, Kansas. An enormous amount of land for any farmer, but especially for a black man in the post-Reconstruction era. He built a two-story mansion on his property, a symbol of dignity and success in a time when black prosperity was often met with hostility. That home became famous. It had gas lighting, a music room, and even guest suites for traveling dignitaries. Visitors included both black leaders and white agricultural scientists. Everyone wanted to see the farm where the Potato King worked his magic. And Groves wasn't hoarding his success. He was sharing it. He employed dozens of people, both black and white, paying fair wages and offering year-round work. He also opened his property to community gatherings, barbecues, festivals, picnics, and even agricultural fairs. People who came to those events said that being on Groves' farm felt like stepping into a different version of America. One where hard work, intelligence, and fairness actually paid off. But what makes Junius George Groves truly special isn't just that he was successful. It's how he used that success. He didn't just want wealth. He wanted uplift. He helped establish black schools, business associations, and even a community improvement society to help other African Americans buy land and become independent farmers. He believed ownership was the path to equality, that freedom wasn't complete until you could stand on your own land, on your own terms. At one point, Groves co-founded an organization called the Negro Business League, inspired by Booker T. Washington's ideals of self-reliance and entrepreneurship. And while others preached it, Groves lived it. He became a symbol of what black success could look like, not as an exception, but as a model. Booker T. Washington himself recognized Groves's achievements, citing him in speeches as proof that African Americans could compete in business and industry when given fair access. But success in that era wasn't simple. Groves faced discrimination constantly, from markets, lenders, and transportation companies. Some distributors tried to block his shipments. He found creative ways around them. He formed his own shipping partnerships and negotiated directly with buyers. He didn't need middlemen. He built relationships with grocery chains and urban suppliers himself. In other words, he turned the system on its head. By 1905, newspapers across America, black and white alike, were running stories about him. Headlines like, "A Negro farmer becomes the potato king," took over. But behind those words was something deeper, a quiet defiance. In an era of Jim Crow, lynching, and segregation, Groves's success was a living contradiction to racist ideologies. He proved, through sheer excellence, that ability has no color, and that a man's worth can't be measured by his birth. So, why don't we hear about Junius George Groves as often as other historical figures? Part of it is because his story doesn't fit the familiar template. He wasn't an activist in the streets or a politician in Washington. He was something rarer, an economic activist. He used ownership, agriculture, and community building as his tools of revolution. His success was quiet, but it shook foundations. Let's think about what that meant in his time. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, America was doubling down on segregation. The Supreme Court's Plessy versus Ferguson decision had legalized separate but equal. White supremacist violence was peaking. And yet, here was Junius Groves, a black man running a profitable business, employing white workers, and corresponding with agricultural scientists as an equal. That was subversive in its own way. He was rewriting what was possible. And when you step back and look at it, Junius Groves's life mirrors the best of the American story. Think about it. Born enslaved, migrates west, builds an empire out of the earth, uplifts his community, proves his humanity through excellence and generosity. If that's not the American dream, I don't know what is. By the time he passed away in 1925, Junius Groves had built not just a farm, but a legacy. He left behind a model of economic empowerment that echoed through the generations. From the black farmers of the early 20th century to the entrepreneurs and urban developers that followed. And though his story was largely forgotten in mainstream history books, it's starting to resurface, especially as we look for stories of innovation and resilience in the face of impossible odds. Today, his name lives on in Kansas history, agricultural museums, and in the soil of the Midwest, where a boy born in slavery proved that freedom could grow into something extraordinary. So when you hear the nickname, the Potato King of the World, don't just smile at its charm. Remember what it meant, a man who planted seeds in a world that didn't believe he should exist, and harvested dignity, wealth, and respect from the same ground that once held him captive. Junius George Groves was a trailblazer not just for African Americans, but for anyone who believes that perseverance and knowledge can build empires from dust. He turned oppression into opportunity. And his story reminds us that sometimes the greatest revolutions don't happen in capitals or battlefields. They happen in fields of potatoes, under the Kansas sun, in the hands of people who refuse to give up. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, share it, especially with someone who loves untold history. And next time you walk past a farmer's market or see a potato in your kitchen, think of Junius George Groves, the man who grew more than anyone else thought possible.